Good evening. I'm Reverend Dr. Charles Williams, and I have been on DATV many years ago, and I've been persuaded to come back on once more, given a lot of things that are happening in this country right now. And we're going to be, with what's going on now, what we're going to do is be taking a look at a lot of things that are happening in this country and how it affects Dayton and the rest of the Miami Valley. And this evening, we're going to be dealing with an issue that is of national importance and extremely important here in Dayton. There are a lot of state and federal mandates and laws that are coming out that affect the quality of life of people right here in the Miami Valley. And to explore that this evening, we're going to be talking with the Miami Valley Fair Housing Center. As a human being and a citizen, I think most people realize or support that everyone is entitled to decent housing. And to help us with that this evening, I want to welcome, first of all, Mr. Ronald Jackson. Mr. Jackson is the chair of the board of directors of the Miami Valley Fair Housing Center. We want to welcome him. And he is right here in the studio live. We also are supposed to be having Mr. Jim McCarthy, who is the executive director, and we do have him. Hello, Mr. McCarthy. We're very glad to have you on Zoom. Can you hear us?
Good to be with you. Yes, sir.
Okay, that's fine because we cannot hear you. And we're so glad. Mr. McCarthy, given his extensive responsibilities, was not able to make it here into the studio, so he agreed to be here by Zoom. So what we're going to do is start off, and hopefully we'll be able to get the technology straightened out so that he'll be able to give the contributions that he wants to give. All right, Mr. Jackson, let's start off with you. First of all, thank you for what you do. Thank you for the contributions that you're making here with the Miami Valley. What is the purpose of the Miami Valley Fair Housing Council or Center?
Well, thank you for having me.
And thank you for being here.
Us to speak on such an important issue. Mm-hmm. The Miami Valley Fair Housing Center was born out of the Civil Rights Act of 1968.
Okay.
And the purpose of the Miami Valley Fair Housing Center is to help those who need assistance or feel like they're being discriminated against or treated unfairly in the Dayton, Miami Valley, and even in the state. So we look to help those individuals who feel that way, help them to alleviate the burden of being treated unfairly against, and to help them to navigate the process when they feel they're being unfairly treated, and how to, if it means file a complaint, or if it means an advocate to speak on their behalf. I always like to say that people, the Miami Valley Fair Housing Center is an institution or place here in Dayton that helps people who don't know they have an advocate helping them behind the scenes.
Okay, and you pointed out a lot of different issues here that we're going to cover. and that is, I guess, we all have to admit that discrimination can and does exist in the housing area of our society, the same as in all other kinds of discrimination in various sectors
Yes.
of our society. Now, when we get into the discrimination, we get into civil rights. When you brought out that this whole initiative came out of the civil rights movement, we're dealing with protected classes. Tell us something about protective classes. What do we mean, or what are we talking about when we talk about protective classes?
Sure, Charlie. You're talking about being unfairly treated in base of age, base of familial status, based on sexual identity, based on military status, based on disability. Those are some of the protected classes that are out there that people are being treated unfairly against just because of those, they fall into those protected classes. So the Fair Housing Center is there to, again, help those folks in those protected classes by, like you said, by law. That the federal government has said these are the protected classes that people need assistance and need help in.
I was surprised to hear you say military. Could you unpack that a little bit? How are military discriminated against in the housing arena? Because you would think that people would be glad to serve military.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm sure Jim will have some on this, but also when you find people coming home based on their disabilities, based on unfortunate events that have happened to them to come home, seeking housing, seeking assistance, seeking help. A lot of cases they feel that they don't get the assistance that they need, even though, and it's not because those protections are not afforded to them. You find that mainly on the local level of the different ways that they're being mistreated against, as far as needing housing assistance, needing banking assistance, people who have injuries coming back, they may have some mental issues. So we want to make sure that they are even being treated fairly when they're seeking housing, seeking rental, making sure that landlords are accommodating these folks with these different issues that are coming back.
Okay, and that you bring up a lot of different issues in talking about the specific populations. I was surprised to hear about for military. I would not have thought that military
Sure.
would have been. Let's talk about some of these areas that the center works in. And what I want to know is, can I have is Mr. McCarthy with us? Okay. All right. Now, Mr. McCarthy, can you hear us? All right. I believe we're still having some technical issues with Mr. McCarthy, I believe. Okay, so I guess we're going to be sailing for a while here until we can get the technology here straightened out. But I think that I was very impressed within the green room. We were going over some of these issues, and certainly there are certain specifics that the executive director has to offer, but as the chair of the board, you seem to be pretty well versed on the mechanics of this issue. You really did, and I want to give you the opportunity to talk about some of these issues. And the first issue I want you to talk about is the issue of accommodations. Now let's talk about what is an accommodation, and how in what kind of accommodations do people normally request?
Well, you think of accommodation as something that people feel like they are and should be in a reasonable place of living. Their expectation when they either buying a property or renting a property that should be there. I mean,
Now, is the landlord required by law to make those accommodations?
well, I mean, reasonable accommodations, you know,
What are reasonable accommodations?
reasonable accommodations is everything in working order. You know,
Okay.
the utilities in working order, you know. Is there the number of units available? Are there home issues that I don't have to deal with on a day when I'm renting? Is everything in order when I come into the place?
Okay, now, that's for everyone.
Right.
But special accommodations, let's say for disabilities.
Sure.
Yeah, what would a landlord, now certainly all those things you're thinking, those are the rudiments, this is the basic
Right.
that needs to be in place, and I'm
That's
sure
correct.
your center sees to that.
Yes.
That's a standard list. But what kind of accommodations for disabilities would you expect, or would a landlord be required?
Reverend Williams.
Well, let's take
Incorporate.
an event of disability. Let's say a person needs a pet, a service pet.
Okay, let's take that.
Is that something that the landlord would accommodate for that
Okay.
person, which they see as a reasonable accommodation?
Okay.
As I need a service pet. I'm in a wheelchair. Do you have the square footage, or do you have the areas where I can move around? Do you have bars, shower bars in place that if I need to take a shower? Do you have a bench set in place that I need to, if I need to use that bench? Is everything too high that I can't reach? Those are some accommodations that folks with disabilities would want to see in a place. And then the landlord would have to see, okay, am I making reasonable those accommodations for that class?
And obviously, your council, your center would help the landlord in seeking out.
That's if the landlord wants to provide those type of services to disabled folks. So if one or two things I think would happen.
Okay.
They would themselves contact the Fair Housing Center to say, hey, I want to be in compliance
Okay.
with fair housing laws. Help me to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. But you find a lot of the landlords don't reach out to the Fair Housing Center. And so in turn, sometimes they don't make reasonable accommodations, but they say that they're renting to any and everyone. So if you have a person who comes and they have a disability and they notice the disability, or they may state it, but the landlord may say, we don't have anything available. Or they're not going to make that accommodation.
Okay. Well, are there funds? Do you help landlords to get the funds that are necessary to make some of those accommodations?
We don't have the funds to give to the landlords to make those accommodations.
No, but can you assist them in finding the funds? The agencies, referrals is what I'm
Yes,
saying.
we can make referrals.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the area of racial discrimination. What does a person do if a person feels that the landlord is not running to him or her because let's take the racial issue first of all, due to racial discrimination? What do you recommend a person do for that?
I recommend if a person feels that based on discrimination based on race, they contact the Fair Housing Center. Then what the Fair Housing Center does is we have what we call testers, or people who go out, and if we feel that this has happened before, let's just say a certain landlord, certain company has some complaints about racial discrimination. So what we do, we have people who go out. It's almost like shoppers. We have people who go out and
Mystery shoppers.
like a mystery shopper.
Yeah, I know that.
And
I
we
know
have-
that strategy. I know some people that were mystery shoppers.
Yep, and we'll have them go out, and they will go through training at the Fair Housing Center before we send them out. We'll send out a black couple, or if they feel there's a black person or if a person we'll send someone out to test the situation and see if that is going on and is it pervasive. And if we found out that that is happening, then we go to the next step and try to work out mediation with the landlord. And if they still decide that they don't want to make those changes, then we take it a step further.
And a step further. And we're going to get into the administrative process, because I think one of the things that is important is that there is, first of all, I want to highly recommend the website for this organization. It is quite extensive. It is quite, and it covers so many different areas.
And I think that's because we try to be that advocate. We also try to have partners that we can refer, like you stated earlier, refer. We try to give as much information as we can, because one of the things is how we are getting the information out there.
Okay. I want to go back to, I'm getting a message that Mr. McCarthy is available at this time, and we're going to hopefully be able to give you a break. Mr. McCarthy,
Yes, sir.
can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. A couple things we want that the chairman of your board has brought up. We're going to give you the opportunity to clarify. And what we're dealing with now is, well, first of all, have you had the opportunity to listen to some of the comments that he's made?
Yes, sir. I've been able to hear you the entire time.
Okay, good. Now, what I want to do is just give you the open chance to go ahead and respond, because this gentleman has given us a lot of very good information, but he always defers and says, but Jim can give you the specifics. So Jim, go ahead and give us the specifics.
Yeah, and I really appreciate Ron stepping in for me since I couldn't make it down. But in all fairness, he does all the handling and raising of the money and taking care of the board. And the dynamics of the day-to-day is my responsibility. So I'll try and help you out a bit. I know that you asked about military status, so we'll start there. Military status is a protected class status particular to the state of Ohio. And it was passed by the state legislature as a result of some folks who were called up for service in Desert Storm and those various things, and then were subjected to like unbelievable terms and conditions in order to break their lease because they were called up for service or they were moved and that type of thing. And so the military status is really so that folks are not discriminated against when they are engaging in protecting the country or providing service to the country in one of the armed forces.
Okay.
And that's particular to the state.
All right, now, the other thing I want you to expand upon, the protected classes. Now, he gave us a very good list. Did you want to respond to that?
Well, Ron, I think had it. The federally protected classes are race, color, religion, sex, national origin, family status, and disability.
What do you mean
Now,
by
in the
family
law, it's
status?
actually called, I'm sorry, sir.
What do you mean by family status? That was kind of surprising for me. I mean, whether you're a mother or grandmother or grandfather or brother or uncle? I'm not understanding that.
Family status was added to the law the same time as disability was added. In the law, it's actually called handicap. It's not called disability. But they were both added in 1988. And family status means the presence of children, anyone under the age of 18 in the household. And that was added because back then it was not uncommon to see entire communities that were advertised as quote unquote adult only communities.
Oh,
And what
okay.
we saw were that most often single female heads of household were the ones who were being discriminated against because they had children in the family and they were unable to rent homes or apartments in a large number of units. And so that's why family status was added.
Okay, anything else? I'm glad, thank you, you're bringing
Most
out some specifics here. And I think Mr. Jackson is got a relief here. I wanted to know if he wanted his water glass filled.
I'm good.
Well, the one thing about the Fair Housing Act, which the Federal Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, it's important
Right.
to know the history. We did not, as a country, come easily to the Fair Housing Act. In fact, the Fair Housing Act had languished in Congress for more than 3 years. It was not something the country wanted to do. But when Dr. King was assassinated, and literally people took to the streets and cities were burning, the folk in Congress and the president knew they needed to do something, and it was President Johnson who said, we're going to use the Fair Housing Act to try and reassure the country that we're going to do the right thing. And despite the fact that the act had languished for more than 3 years in Congress and never got out of committee, 1 week to the day from the day that Dr. King was assassinated, the act passed through both houses of Congress and was signed into law. 1 week to the day after he was assassinated. And then when they passed the act, it was actually what we would now recognize as an unfunded mandate, because they gave the act to HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, to enforce, but they really did not appropriate any money or provide any budget to really do that, nor was HUD equipped to do it at that time. And that remains largely true today, because the Fair Housing Act is primarily enforced not by HUD and not by state agencies, but by private, nonprofit fair housing organizations like the Miami Valley Fair Housing Center that have been started by community activists and organizers all across this country in order to try and realize both the letter of the law and the promises embodied in the spirit of the law.
Okay, well, I want to also pick up on accommodations. Are landlords required to put in accommodations? And if they are, how much are the renters financially responsible for? And when they leave, are they responsible for putting the facility back to the way it was before they rented the facility and needed the accommodations? In other words, what if a landowner says, I don't have the money to make these accommodations, and a person with disabilities wants to move into their property? Think we've lost the audio again.
Is that better?
Yeah, now
Sorry,
that's better.
my
Okay.
bad.
Yeah.
Okay. Couple of things to know with regard to disability, and that is there is reasonable accommodations and there is also reasonable modification. So reasonable accommodations are essentially an accommodation to a policy or a procedure or something like that. It's not changing any type of structure or adding any type of change to the building. So for instance, a community may have a no pet policy. However, if the person with disability has either a service animal or a companion animal that is prescribed for their disability, then they can keep an animal in a no pet community by requesting a reasonable accommodation. That is an exception to the rule, the policy, or the procedure that the community normally observes. Separate from that, if there's someone who has physical limitations, let's say they use a wheelchair and they need a ramp, or they use a wheelchair and so they cannot reach kitchen countertop that are at the normal height, but they need to be lowered. That is what's known as a reasonable modification. And the modification means that a physical structure or, the door needs to be widened or a ramp needs to be added in order to provide them with access to the building. So in private housing, so housing that is owned by private companies, corporations, mom and pop landlords, there is no obligation on behalf of the landlord to provide a reasonable modification where they must fund the modification. What they have to do is allow the person with the disability to make the modification at the person with the disability's own expense, and to allow them to return it when they depart from the building, if it's reasonable for them to return it. So for instance, many older buildings have doorways that are only 30 inches wide. They're not really wide enough for wheelchairs to pass through. To widen a doorway, we obviously don't require then for folks to return it to the more narrow width when they depart from the place. But the expense of making those modifications in private housing is borne by the individual with the disability who needs the modification. The landlord just must permit it. And the landlord may require that they know that it's being done by a professional who knows how to do the work and is capable of doing the work in a skilled manner.
Okay, I want to bring up another important point that you talk about in a skilled manner. If I'm not mistaken, and I believe when your board chair and I were talking in the green room, we talked about, shoddy work that gets done. And and we're going to go through the complaint process, but how do you deal with, in that process you're talking about, shoddy work?
Well, basically, the landlord cannot place unreasonable demands upon the individual with a disability. So let's say the landlord it would be reasonable for the landlord to request the plans for how the modification is going to be done and information on the individual who's going to be doing the modifications to ensure that, they aren't having just Uncle Joe, who happens to be willing to do it, do them, but they actually have someone who knows something about electric or something about plumbing or something about carpentry, whatever it is that needs to be done in order to make the modification. That would be reasonable, but it would not be reasonable for the landlord to require a specific company or individual to make the modification.
Okay, then that's what I want to do, because shoddy work can be done in situations other than dealing with disabled tenants. What I want to get
that would be something we want to talk about separately. I think, because we have to keep them distinguished. So that the other thing to know that we haven't got to yet is that in public housing, so housing that is owned either by the local housing authority or by HUD or any other type of subsidized housing where the federal government is contributing to the rental amount that is paid to the housing provider. And this does not include the Housing Choice Voucher Program, or what is known better as the Section 8 program. So when I speak about subsidized housing, I am specifically not talking about the Section 8 program.
Okay.
Because the Section 8 program is a voluntary program that landlord can choose to participate in, but they are currently not required to participate in.
Okay, so you wouldn't have any authority over them. They would have to report directly to Section 8.
No, that's not quite it. So when someone receives a housing choice voucher, there are two types of vouchers, first of all. One is like location-based, and that voucher is assigned to a specific unit at a specific address. And that voucher remains with that unit forever. The other type of voucher is the more valuable voucher, and it's one that is issued to an individual. And the individual is required to live in the first unit for 12 months. But once that individual has lived in that unit for 12 months, that voucher then becomes one that travels with the individual. So let's say we have someone who lives here in Dayton, but their family, in fact, all is in Colorado. Once they have established and received a voucher, and by the way, they're very difficult to get. The waiting list is thousands of people long and usually is closed and only opens once every 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
And many people spend 7 or 8 years waiting before they get this type of voucher. But once they get it and they are in the unit for a year, then that voucher will port. It's called portability, and it ports with the individual, and they can take the voucher and they can actually go to Denver and use the voucher in Denver, provided that they find someone who is willing to accept the voucher.
Okay.
And that's what's important to know, is that Section 8 landlord may choose either to accept or not accept the voucher. They are not required to participate in the Section 8 program at this time.
Okay, then that's where I want to go to the next point. Landlords have rights, tenants have rights. Let's first start with the tenants' rights. Now, the voucher issue, that's a separate issue. I don't think you exercise much authority over, correct?
You are correct.
Yeah, okay, so let's get to the rights. What I want to get to are the rights. And then I want to get to another issue of federal and state involvement and how that is affecting the job that you have to do here in Dayton. First of all, what are the tenants' rights?
Well, everyone has a right to equal housing opportunity in this country. And that's what's key, is that they're under the Fair Housing Act. It's important to distinguish the vernacular or the vocabulary kind of trips us up. Dr. King actually referred to it as open housing. So in his original movement, he referred to what we now know as fair housing as open housing, because so many people were closed from moving into community. Fair housing means no housing discrimination. So when we talk about right, we're talking about individuals' right to an equal opportunity to live anywhere that they can afford to live. Now, separate from that, there are landlord-tenant rights. So more like if the landlord doesn't make necessary repairs.
That's what I want to get into. That's what I want to get into. What I want to get into, if I sign a lease to rent, what are my rights that I should expect?
Well, I'm not qualified to be able to tell you that because, first of all, I'm not an attorney. And second of all, the Fair Housing Act really doesn't have anything to do with. Sorry about that, I did that. The Fair Housing Act does not have anything directly to do with landlord-tenant rights. So the right for an individual to have the repairs timely made to their unit, or for the landlord to expect quiet enjoyment of the unit and not disturb the other neighbors and not tear up the property. Those are landlord-tenant rights that are all guided by state law, not by federal law.
Okay, but
and
now
they don't have anything to do with the Fair Housing Act.
But
I know it's confusing, but
no, it's not. No, you made a very important point. It's not there, and because we're going to be getting into this, there's a line of demarcation here between what your center can do and state and federal guidelines, and we're going to get to that. But one of the things that you brought up, you said you can't answer this because you're not an attorney, but you handle complaints, correct?
yes, sir.
And
We facilitate complaints, actually.
Okay.
The better way to understand what the Fair Housing Center is think of us as investigators. So
Okay.
folks come to the Fair Housing Center and they may say, something just doesn't feel right, or I don't think I'm being treated fairly, and they describe to us their circumstance. And then we listen and we try and determine what might have been going wrong. And then, as you and Mr. Jackson talked about already, we do use secret shoppers or mystery shoppers. We call them housing discrimination testers. And we send them out and we try and replicate the experience that, say, if Mr. Jackson contacted us and said, hey, I think this happened to me, we would then deploy testers and have them try and replicate the experience that Mr. Jackson tells us about. Sometimes we're able to do that, and sometimes we're not. Many times, people are just given lousy customer service, but they're not discriminated against.
Okay,
Housing discrimination is very difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, but that's what we're in the business of doing.
Okay, and that's the point that I want to make here, is that basically your investigation is going to be discriminatory and is not going to be related necessarily to the quality or the lack of quality that is not being provided in the property by the landowner.
That's correct.
Okay, and that's a very important point, and I want to get to, and I want to go back. We've given your boss here enough of a break, and now I'm going to go to him because I want to talk to you as a person that served on many boards, and right now this is a time in our country that has many more challenges, I feel, to board members than what it once did because of a lot of the federal and state mandates that are coming out right now. First of all, what are you seeing as the chair of the board? What are you seeing that's coming out of Washington and Columbus that you feel is more of a challenge for you as the chairman of the board and the board? What are some of the things that, and how is that affecting your supervision of your executive director? What are some of the challenges that are coming right now?
Well, I think the major challenge that we've had is, I think it was either February or March, Jim sent a letter to the board saying that part of our funding was cut.
Now, who cut the funding, feds or the state?
Fed.
Feds.
President Trump.
Okay, all right.
Cut
Let's just call it for what it is. All right, go ahead.
Cut our funding, especially our education and enforcement grants, which allows us to go into the community to educate the community on fair housing issues, be of support. So what happened there is that once that cut, we had the difficult decision of, number one, were we going to have to let our staff go? Number two, we had to decide whether or not we were going to have to suspend all complaints coming in because we already have a ton of complaints that we're following up on. So it just affect us, put us in a slowdown of whether or not we can effectively do the work of the Fair Housing Center.
Okay, let's talk just briefly some stats about a year, about how many complaints would your center receive?
Jim, do you want to?
Well, yeah, actually, so it's important this is another layer. We receive approximately 1,500 inquiries from people each year, between 13 and 1,500 per year.
13 to 1,500. 13 to 1,500. That's a lot.
Yes, sir. Yes, but it's important to know that not all of those are actually discrimination complaints. Many of those are landlord-tenant complaints, like my landlord will not spray for pests, or I don't understand why this doesn't happen. And one of the important things that private organizations like ours do is that we sort of filter, the chaff from the grain. So we try and encourage people to understand what housing discrimination is. We do have a publication that was put together by Advocates for Basic Legal Equality that we make available on our website for landlord-tenant law, and we share with people to self-educate. And then what that does is it winnows down and it only sends legitimate discrimination complaints forward to the administrative agencies or to the courts.
And how many of those about that actually will survive this filter process?
So it drops significantly, 1,500 inquiries down to about 300, 360 that are ones that we conduct some form of investigation that takes us more than 3 hours to complete. And then it dropped another significant down to, from that 300 to approximately 60 that we handle that, take significant amounts of time. But many of the cases we begin last month and years. So there are some cases we're currently handling that we've been engaged in for 11 years.
Now, do you work, all right, now, if it's a discrimination case, what other agencies do you work with, because you've already said you're not an attorney, in order to deal with these kinds of discriminatory complaints? Do you refer these to the state? Do you refer these to the city legal department? To whom are they referred?
So there are two, in Dayton, specifically, there are two layers. Well, first of all, it's important to know you can pursue a housing discrimination complaint either administratively, and that means with an agency that is not a court. And that is always free, and it's usually quicker. Or you can bring a lawsuit in a court of law, and that is more expensive, obviously, requires an attorney, and usually takes longer. So administratively, you either would file in the state of Ohio with the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, which is a state agency, and if it's inside the city of Dayton where the transaction occurred, then that administrative complaint would be filed with the Dayton Human Relations Council.
Okay, then would it go to mediation at that level, or do you try, it would seem to me you try to mediate it at your level first before your board chairman is shaking his head, yes, that would go forward. Okay.
We always try and conciliate or mediate, and we encourage individuals to attempt to do that as well. Lots of times, it's a misunderstanding that when people learn to communicate with one another, it can be resolved. Not always, but many times that's true.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, how do you feel, how severe are these budget cuts that are coming, that are going to affect the services that you have to offer for the citizens of Dayton and the Miami Valley?
Yeah, very severe. Those cuts have, again, like I said, affect, number one, the people who work for the agent that serve the community. Mm-hmm. And so if those folks are cut, then we are put at either a standstill or trying to determine then what could we effectively provide to the community and to these people who need assistance. So that's number one. Number two, the service that we provide to the constituents, the people of the community, it becomes a pick and choose of what we can effectively do for them. So the severity of these cuts, we have to look at, as a board, we had to look at what funding that we do have left, what do we have in reserves, and what can we effectively do in the community.
So let me just make a cause and effect here. Let's just make a cause and effect. The conclusion that I'm drawing, is, in essence, these budget cuts can potentially increase discrimination and allow more people to get away with it.
You're correct.
Okay, could you say that louder?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay, thank you. In other words, these budget cuts are impacting the human rights, the constitutional human rights of the citizens here in Dayton.
It is. And what we've also found, and before I let you in, Jim, we've also found that it's across the country when this happens. It forces some of these agencies who have smaller staffs, they may have to shut down. And so that is a cause and effect.
As well, if they have to completely shut down. Yeah. Now, did you have to let staff go?
We did not. Fortunately for us, we did not. I always tell people, we have a very strong team, Jim and his team. We have a good board as well. I've chaired the board, I don't know, I think now about 6 or 7 years.
Oh, wow.
And we've made some, I would say we've made some wise choices financially to make sure. And one of the things I always give kudos to Jim McCarthy and John Zimmerman and their team is that, yes, we do have a responsibility to the community, but we also have a responsibility to those people who we employ at the center because we're affecting their lives as well.
Okay, Jim, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I will give you a little bit of more specific. We received notice from the federal government on February the 27th at about 8:40 p.m. that all of our enforcement money, which was to the tune of $425,000 per year, had been terminated effective February 27th.
All of it?
So,
Yes.
All of it?
All of it.
And that $425,000 was actually part of a 3-year commitment that the government made. When we applied, we were actually awarded 3 years of funding at $425,000 specifically to assist in enforcement of the Fair Housing Act. And when President Trump was inaugurated, one of his executive orders was to defund the private enforcement initiative and terminate the enforcement grants that were currently in place. Now, the private organizations fought back, and thanks to some, hard legal work by attorneys who represent the National Fair Housing Alliance and organizations like ours, we were able to get a restraining order, a temporary restraining order that kept the funding in place. However, that is not yet even a final decision. The issue has been briefed, but the court has not ruled on this yet. We are, in fact, continuing to receive funding, and we are now in the beginnings of the 3rd year of the 3 years we were already awarded. What remains to be seen is whether or not we will be able to apply for and receive additional funding beyond when the 3rd year expires, because President Trump's budget presented to Congress for fiscal year 2026 completely defunded and zeroed out the Fair Housing Initiatives Program, which is the only federal program that provides funding to organizations like ours.
Well, are you saying that at the end of 3 years, your initiative could completely and totally dissolve?
No, sir, I'm saying that beginning with the 2026 federal fiscal year, which begins on October 1st of 2025, there could be no more fair housing money from the federal government at all if President Trump's budget were adopted as he proposed.
But then that would, again, I would say, wouldn't that dissolve your program totally then?
Well, eventually it would. As
That's
Mr.
what I'm
Jackson's
saying.
already alluded to, we have operating reserves that we have saved and kept, and would allow us to continue to operate for a period of time. But yes, it would mean that our agency would have to go out of business.
And then what would be next in terms of ensuring and protecting the civil rights of the citizens of Dayton in the housing area? What would that mean?
Well, I would only be able to speculate because I don't know. Now, I believe that some of the conservative members of Congress would tell you that the state government or the Ohio Civil Rights Commission or some other agency would be able to provide services. And certainly there might be some semblance of that. But what I can tell you with absolute certainty is since the act was passed in 1968, it has not been the federal government, nor has it been the state government that have provided the majority of the realization of the letter of the law and the spirit of the law under the Fair Housing Act. It has been private, nonprofit organizations and community advocates who've been working in the trenches, largely volunteers many times, before there was funding provided to do this work. Because from 1968 until 1983, there was no federal funding available to do this work. It wasn't until 1983 that the federal government started consistently funding nonprofit organizations like ours.
Okay, I saw a response from your board chair, and I want to give him the opportunity to respond, because I think you're seeing a little bit of pessimism in here, in this.
Well, yeah,
Possibly.
only from the standpoint that what Jim was talking about is that, which, to make it, like you said bluntly earlier, they don't do this work. These private fair housing
Exactly
centers do
it.
this work.
That's right.
So if you're taking the funding away from folks who've done this work since, like Jim has said,
For years.
For years.
And have the process established
Yes.
and knows what's going on.
exactly, you take that away, then how are they going to effectively enforce fair housing laws? How are they going to effectively support people in the community that need assistance? There wouldn't be.
And see, and I have this skepticism, and that is, would there be alternatives, or alternative sources that would be willing to pick up the gauntlet and carry it?
Well, I
Well,
think
there may well be, but I will
Right.
tell you that the federal government does not even spend $70 million a year on this work across the entire country.
Oh, that's
It is
across
a
the whole
pittance-
country.
Right.
It's a pittance of money in the budget overall.
Yeah.
There's not even $70 million that's spent on it. So to be concerned about it is really ludicrous. But I also will tell you that viewers can watch the news, because there was a story that ran in the New York Times and is going to be developing on the national level, because there have been career attorneys, fair housing and equal opportunity attorneys at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, who have come out and told their story that the current administration is effectively not enforcing the Fair Housing Act, and is in fact subverting the Fair Housing Act. And they have gone public, and now there are national civil rights organizations who are calling upon Congress and the HUD Inspector General to conduct an investigation into these failures. But people should understand that civil rights, whether it's housing or otherwise, are absolutely under attack by the Trump administration. And they do not believe that the hard-fought civil rights that exist are necessary.
And I think that summarizes the status of the whole situation, exactly what you said, is that people aren't looking at the consequences of the budget cuts and the impact that those cuts are going to have on the human and civil rights of everyday citizens. That's the tragedy. That's where the impact, that's where the rubber meets the road.
that's the crux of the matter.
That's, as your board chair said, that's the crux of the matter. I want to thank both of you. I want to thank both of you for being here, and encourage advocacy and understanding on the part of citizens as to this impact. Thank you both for coming. I also want to give a thanks to my lovely wife, Sonia Kirkwood Williams, who's an academic librarian who did very good work, as she usually does, to get her husband on the track, because we got this together and rolling.
And I filled in until Jim could get here.
Yeah, and he filled in till Jim got
and
here.
Reverend Williams, I want to thank you for the
Thank you.
opportunity
Yes,
for
yes.
us to tell this story,
Yeah.
and for the foresight to invite us here.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you once more, and I want to thank the viewers. Thank you very much, and next month we're going to be dealing with another issue of what's going on now. Thank you for watching.